Legionnaires, it's Jim and Jay here with a special mailbag episode. We've been getting a lot of email from you guys, which is fantastic over the last several weeks and months, but we haven't had as much time as we thought to talk about it on the episode because, we just have a lot of things going on. But we did want to get back to you and read your emails because you're very thoughtful enough to write them to us in the first place and maybe respond to them as well.
Well, we are going to respond to them. Yes, that's not
that is not a baby. That is not a baby. That's why we're doing this.
Exactly. So yeah, we get tons of, I always want to say electronic mail. I can't do the impersonation. Tons of messages on Discord and messages on Blue Sky as well. So we're talking about all of that stuff. And we really wanted to answer some of your questions. And we didn't want to take 20 minutes at the end of an episode when we've already been talking a lot about, say, why the death of Invisible Kid was cool or not. So let's focus with this. So let's start with the mailbag. Let's open that up. We've got a bunch of emails and we've got a few people who've emailed us numerous times, which is great. And if you want to know how to be a guest on this podcast, that's actually the easiest way because two of the people we're going to read emails from, they're future guests for us. So let's start, Jim. The first email from Tim, and I will resist saying Tim the Enchanter as much as I can because that just shows how old I am.
Tim?
Yes, they call him Tim. So,
all right. So Tim is emailing us first about the Smallville episode that we had a few episodes back with our special guest, Anthony Desiato of the Digging for Kryptonite podcast. He also has a great new Batman podcast, Lighting the Bat Signal. So definitely recommend you listen to that because it's fantastic. So anyway, Timmy says, the exploration of Smallville Clark being integral to getting this version of the LSH on track reminds me of Joshua Williamson's recent callouts about how important the Superman and the LSH connection is. I look forward to what the reestablishment of these links mean for the future of the LSH under Williamson and the past if/when Wade ends up exploring the Superboy and era. So thank you for the unexpected topic. Having the extra context of what came before and after Smallville makes me want to go back and watch at least this episode again. You quickly become the most anticipated portion of my Legion podcast lineup, and I look forward to what you have in store for the year ahead. So again, thanks, Tim. This is a great email. I agree with you about the Josh Williamson callouts about the Superman and the LSH connection. I mean, I think we've gone on this podcast quite often about how the Legion is so important to Clark because it taught him how to operate as a team. And I think it's really cool seeing those kind of those stories, whether it's live action or in the comics. And now it feels like the ship of DC is turning back. So we have a Clark with a Legion in his past. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I even go back a little bit further. I think one of the best things Jeff Johns did when writing Superman was making the Legion a key to this. And especially after decades of Superman never being Superboy, right? And that just not happening. And all of us Legion fans are like, no, he needs to be there. This is really important. Like, this is what we grew up on. And it's good to see DC is embracing that.
What's going to be interesting, and because Tim calls this out about the Superman or Superboy and era, which is going on right now in Action Comics, where it's very much focused on Superboy and his adventures. So it's in the past of the DCU, of the current DCU. If we actually might get a situation where Mark Waid writes the Legion again. I think that's kind of interesting. So we'll have to see, I guess, what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, and I think sometimes the best Legion stories of the last, I'd say, let's say 15 years have been the look backs, not the trying to write the current. Like, I think when you get the creators going, I want to write Superman as a teenager and I want to write these kids just learning what they're doing. Sometimes it's really leaning into their wheelhouse. And I think Wade would be really good at that. I think and especially following the rules of whatever the continuity is. As long as they're not three boot jerks, I'm okay with that. Okay.
Exactly.
Jumping forward to the next episode after that, we'll stick with the emails. Tim wrote us again about when we did our Planetary Chance Machine episode. For those of you who remember, we completely randomized the episode. We didn't know what planets we were going to talk about, and he really appreciated that. He actually made this comment. As for the latest episode covering the Legion planets using the Planetary Chance Machine, so you don't focus on the more important planets, first makes significantly more sense than the Planetary Chance Machine itself. And I agree. Like, the getting into the nitty-gritty of the Legion planets, I think, is always really good. And I think if I don't hear about Kalu for a little while, it's not going to be like, they just go back there over and over. He continues, I appreciate the curveballs it tossed both of you as hosts, and it was fun to hear you adjust to the next planet being discussed. I also like that it wasn't just planets, but any galactic location of note. We talked about Nullport. We talked about Medicus 1. He actually, the next time we do this kind of episode, to tell him how we found all the planets, well, we're just going to tell you now. So for me, I started with just a very simple Wikipedia list of all of the Legion home planets. And then I got into a website that I don't think has been updated in a long, long time called legionwiki.com. And they actually have an entire page of just major worlds. And you can split it by the different eras of the Legion. And it's got everything. So like you go, for example, like it's got a listing of like Brog, a world of strange monsters that first appeared in Adventures 305, like stuff that I never would have remembered. So I went through this and I just said, okay, what are the most important planets, areas, so that's how we got Weber's World and we got Nullport and everything like that. But I did go through and cut out the ones that when it's only one episode or one issue, I wanted to pick planets that had a little bit more to it. Jim, how did you find your planet list?
Tim asks in the email if we used Who's Who and or the Legion RPG supplements, and that's basically what I did. Although I did supplement that with some website research as well. I basically went to the Who's Who book because I have the big old Omni back here, and kind of went through to find the worlds, and then I looked in the supplements to find the worlds they were talking about there. And then kind of just made my own call about, okay, which ones are of importance or of note that we can talk about that are kind of interesting. And that's how the list was compiled.
Yeah. And to be honest, after we compiled the list, I don't know if you could hear it in the podcast. I was genuinely surprised by some of the planets that were coming out, because I expected at least we'd get like a Rimbor or a Winath or Wynath or whatever it's called. And the fact that we just kept going to like,
that one?
like the fact that Trom was probably the most significant of all the realms, it actually kind of, I think, made the podcast a little bit more interesting. And it's a test of our knowledge. And I'll be the first to admit that I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an encyclopedia of all things Legion. So that was a good challenge. Now, same episode, Justin Smith wrote us an email as well. And his comment was my commentary on Star Trek and its cruisers and dry dock when we talked about Nullport. He says, I couldn't help but think that early Legion essentially does follow the Prime Directive for planetary interaction. On a lot of the stories, up until probably the end of 3-Boot, approach exploration of these planets like Trekkies. In my opinion, the next Legion stories should do more exploration to build the Legion universe, so that way fans feel like they're learning about the universe as well. I agree 100%. I love when they go on the explorations. I'd love to see, almost like a Voyager Legion, like where they're flown, and that, I think that was one of the great strengths of Legion Lost, when they were
exactly.
like they're constantly exploring new places. And it's funny, the comment about Star Trek, right? And we've talked about this a few times, how you can tell the Legion of the 70s and the 80s, they are all Trek fans, right? The artists, the writers, because there's so much. Yeah, even the 90s too. Yeah. Like I think of, like, let's face it, the Coons are essentially the Klingons, right?
Yeah.
And I think, maybe they're a little bit less Trek as we move forward, and maybe a little bit more Star Wars, or maybe a little bit more. I'm trying to think of what other sci-fi influences would be on it. But I think when Legion is Trek and they're doing kind of those explorations, because I think they have that very similar theory of that idyllic future, not the depressing, crappy future. And I think that's that's why people connect to both. And I think a lot of Legion fans are Trek fans as well. I think there's very strong connections. I mean, if you could see the collection of starships behind Jim, and I remember at one point in time, I would have to translate Star Trek episodes for friends of mine because they'd be like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, they're talking about blah, 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 blah. So I think there is a very diehard connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't agree more. I mean, I like almost fist pumped when I was reading that, because it's very specifically about Star Trek and about Legion Lost, to the point you made. Because the way that I always feel, this is just me, like, wishing I could redo the Legion Lost of the DNA era, just in my own thought pattern or whatever, in my own ideas. Having the entire Legion become lost in that wormhole anomaly, whatever, and they get zapped into wherever they are, and then it's the entire Legion, right? So the whole outpost goes, And then whenever they come back, they basically have to create a brand new ship out of the parts of the outpost. And that's like their Voyager on their way home. And then the rest of the series is them, going from planet to planet and having encounters of whatever kind. And then they finally get back to UP space, and then we get to see all the things that have changed, and how Macaulay has made everything into a nightmare, and how they have to come back and fix all that stuff. So that was always my little if I had the power to be able to change those kind of things, that's what I would do.
Yeah, and it does call back to a lot of the early Legion episodes, or not episodes. See, now you have me doing this as well. You keep saying episodes, now I keep saying episodes. Issues. Man, I'm old and my brain just doesn't work. There's those issues where they're like, hey, we're going here. Hey, we're going here. Like, we just end up on a new planet, and the writers get to have a little bit of fun and
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, like, get messages in that you wouldn't normally see in a kid's comic, or and again, old Star Trek and I think the Next Generation were really good for this as well. Like, getting those, they kind of became morality plays a little bit, and the Legion could definitely handle that. I would take your Legion Lost idea of having the entire Legion, and I would just turn it into I would literally just say, it's a 5-year mission, so it's going to be 60 issues, and we could just have a blast and like just go to DC and say, here's our plan for the Legion. They're going to get sucked somewhere across the cosmos where nobody's seen, nobody's human. They don't know anybody, and you could have a blast with that. I mean, that would be an amazing run of comics.
Yeah, and from a formula perspective, right? You have the Star Trek formula. The Next Generation was the first of the Treks to have the episodic approach from episode to episode that are unique stories, but you did start seeing the thread of an overarching theme of the season, and that really got into play with Deep Space Nine. So yeah, there's absolutely precedent for being able to do that kind of thing. I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah, so imagine if they had done during the reboot when they had the two different teams, and you'd put in, say, Legionnaires in almost like a Deep Space Nine situation where they're on the border of, say, the Dominators and the Coons, and it's like, and they're in the middle of all this, and then at the same time the other team's on Earth, and they're doing, like, you could have two different kinds of stories. Again, DC, just call us up. We have 1,000 ideas on how to make the Legion work. And I am also egotistical enough to say, I think these would be awesome.
The funny thing is, I think that was the idea when they had the outpost and then the folks in the Earth-based headquarters. So you'd have that kind of thing, but that didn't really work out for many reasons. But we've talked about that, I think, before. Okay, so Steve on our Legion Discord actually talks about our planetary chance machine. He says some thoughts on worlds. Corball as a nature preserve, keeping endangered species alive, and the lightning beast power, and the other continental or island preserved for other critters. Agree that Legion World and Weber's World are the same sides of one coin, although it could be a fun rework if Weber's World was imagined as War World, redeemed, reformed, and improved. Also wondering if maybe it started as a Pentagon/Nullport place for the space fleets and slowly became a UN building in space. About Colleen Duran, he says, Colleen is just as lovely and as amazing as her art. I say that from having met her a few times at Comic Cons in the 90s. Can't recall if I shared her sketches of Emerald Empress or Shadow Lass in the recruit generic suit, but happy to do so later.
So just a quick comment on that I love the idea of Corball being basically a nature preserve in space where all of these, where basically it's like, here's where we can protect, alien creatures who maybe are close to extinction, or we can create this perfect world that humans can't get down to. I think that's awesome. I always, whenever I hear War World in the Legion, I kind of have, like you have the two people on their shoulders, like the good and the bad. I kind of have I don't want to see this in the 31st century. And I like my Legion to be distant. Like I really dislike when people show up from things show up from the 21st century. Like, as good as the whole Ra's al Ghul storyline was, I'm just like, no, they have enough villains. And it's kind of the same with War World. Like, just give me something else, like create something else, because that way the writers back in modern day aren't hampered by and you don't have any of these continuity problems. Just leave them be. That way, if the War World ends up getting destroyed, it doesn't break anything. You can just leave it alone. And that's why, I just like my Legion to be in its own, I kind of want to say in its own pocket universe. So they're not connected to DC Central, to go back to there. Okay. That is it for Planetary Chance Machine. I know we're going to come back and we're going to turn the Planetary Chance Machine on once more. So we're going to see what new planets we get to choose. The next episode, we were just talking about Invisible Kid, and Tim sent in another email to talk about this. He says, my first Legion comic introduced me to the clones of Pharaoh Lad and Invisible Kid, Superboy, and Legion of Superheroes 206. So I had a path similar to some of yours, hearing that Lyle was dead, reading his previous adventures, seeing the incredible death of Pharaoh Lad reprinted multiple times, and finally being incredibly disappointed by Lyle's death in Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes 203 when I eventually found a copy. And I think that's a very similar thing for a lot of readers, especially if they started reading in, I'll say, late Silver Age, early Bronze Age, or not late Silver, sorry, Bronze Age, because these two characters were just kind of reminders of the past or reminders of the sacrifices that the Legion had to make. And I agree with you. Like the Pharaoh Lad death is like super heroic and it's just this epic moment. I mean, it's so epic they did it in the animated series. And Invisible Kid just kind of happened. And then he continues, it's probably because he was one of my first Legionnaires that I didn't mind the Gary stewing he got in the reboot era. In fact, after the SW6 batch, Cam, Jackie, and Val died, I can still remember the next time I saw SW6 Lyle and knew in my whole heart that the original's unsatisfying demise meant that this Lyle was never going to die. Happy thoughts. And that's actually a really great way to describe the SW6 Legion and the whole 5 years later is they liked Lyle and they hated the way he was killed. And so you knew he was kind of safe and you knew he was kind of protected. Whereas, of course, if Keith Gibbons not going to turn up a chance to kill Karate Kid, which has become a joke, but it's also kind of fairly true.
Yep. And let's pause on that about the Invisible Kid and the clone SW6 stuff, because we'll get back to that in one of our next comments here.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And then he says, it would have been nice to see more of his relationship with Kondo in the reboot era and use it to give Lyle a character flaw. He enjoyed that nudge to the canon, and he enjoyed the fact that it made those changes, but instead it also showed how his powers can steer him towards keeping secrets and what that might do to his personal and professional relationships. And that's actually a really good point. And I don't know if we got into it enough as we were talking about Invisible Kid. Is like on the one hand, it was sort of this surprise, like, oh, hey, these two characters might be gay, and everybody goes, who cares? It's just a good story. You know what I mean? Like it's not something that makes us go, ooh, which is thank goodness. But the other one is, it showed kind of this other side of Lyle, and it showed that he might be keeping secrets. And to be honest, a guy who's Invisible Kid, you'd kind of think that would go with the powers of like wanting to be hidden or wanting to kind of keep something to himself. And I think Tim, you make a really, really good point here, that it would have been a really good character building moment. And maybe that's why they turned him into a spy in Reboot, of just kind of continuing that. I like keeping secrets, and I like having something on the other side there.
It's certainly fertile ground for storytelling, right? Because you have, when you talk about spies, you have the flashy James Bond kind, which are, they're the kind of spies that you really don't want to have in real life because they're attracting too much attention to themselves, versus the real spies in our world that do the exact opposite. I mean, their job is basically to not attract any attention at all. And like you said, that lines up right with Lyle's power set.
Yeah. Just to go to an aside, that was always one of the funniest parts of, as the James Bond movies continued, was everywhere he'd go, he'd be recognized. And you're like, well, what kind of spy are you? When if you walk into a room, it's like, hey, it's James Bond. He's got a license to kill. Now, don't get me wrong. Still love the movies, but it would be a great James Bond movie if they have like James Bond walk in, grab all the attention, and following behind him is the actual spy doing all the work, because nobody pays attention to him. They're all paying attention to this,
exactly.
This big image. So Tim also said, if they use Lyle going forward, I also hope he's dead. I'm not rooting for any character to die, but I do miss the time when there were dead members who stayed that way, and they were spoken about in cautionary tales or fun flashback issues. And I agree 100%. Like, I think one of the big, I always sort of go with is the story good enough to make up for the loss of the weight of what this character did? Right? Like bringing Bucky back, there's still a part of me that's like, no, bringing back any version of Gwen Stacy is like, no, because her death is just so key to Spider-Man. And a lot of writers do it really well. Like, don't get me wrong. And there's some really, really good stories. Thankfully, nobody said, hey, let's bring Uncle Ben back, because I think that would just be, like, it would just be such a horrible mistake.
Yeah. Unless you do it in the context of like a flashback story, like they did in the recent Spider-Man Superman crossover, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that I think is a perfect way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And then his last comment, which could open just a ton of things, but we won't get into it. Your discussion of the SW6 batch gave me the realization that the first 18 issues of Legionnaires was basically a pilot season for the reboot era. Well, if by that you mean like the crappy first season of a TV show that nobody wants to go back and rewatch, and they figure it out with the second season, then yes, I'll go with that one. But I think it was maybe more the reboot era figured out everything they did wrong and said, okay, we're not. Although there are themes, I can't disagree. There are themes that carried on from the SW6 Legion into reboot, like the xenophobia storylines, although that just seems to be standard Legion stuff now. Okay.
Yep.
And you said we have more comments about.
Yeah. So our good friend Alan Williams, he on our Discord, and again, if you can actually see this for yourself, if you want to join our Discord, it's absolutely free to join. All you have to do is just let us know. And Alan says, I think Carrie Bates just wanted to kill off somebody in Superboy 203. And since they weren't ready to kill off any of the already going to be dead, according to the Adult Legion story characters, but we never saw Invisible Kid in the Adult Legion story, so he was fair game. And he also continues, I thought that maybe the first time Jacques encountered the invisible dimension, he met the real Lyle, but when he went back, it was the dream demon. And that personally, that's kind of how I view it too. It's like the first one was the real deal. The second one was the encounter with the demon. Another possibility is that Jacques read up on the whole story of Lyle's death sometime before Drake ended up in the invisible dimension. Once Jacques got there, the dream demon subsequently read Jacques' mind and built the Lyle Morgue illusion. I think that's a pretty good take too. He mentions the reboot Lyle and the C note in the chapter Teenagers from the Future, which Alan is a co-author of. So go ahead and pick that up if you want. He's also a big fan of the foreground and background shading on page 11 that we spend a lot of time talking about with Eric and Peter. And then this is a kind of a cool note that Alan writes. When I met Mike Grell at C2E2, he said something about wanting to make the male Legionnaires look as sexy as the women, which is why he came up with Cosmic Boy's and Tyrock's costumes, and the redesign of Colossal Boy's costume to bare his arms and legs, though that didn't last. And finally, he says, I think I remember reading somewhere that the part of the original idea of the SW6 batch came from the clone story in Superboy 206, which again, as he recalls, was written to address why the LSH didn't simply clone members who died. And then it's funny that comment there actually kicked off with some discussion on the Discord about, oh my gosh, the SW6 Legion, it's kind of this weird focal point that we're talking about where we have that old story from the 70s being the kind of quasi-inspiration for the SW6 clones, and then how the SW6 story, the Legionnaires, were kind of this backdoor pilot, if you will, for the actual reboot Legion.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how one story or one throwaway story from the 70s had such a dramatic effect on 5 years of comics, right? And I'm sure Carrie Bates was not imagining writing a story. I think it was Carrie Bates who wrote the clone story. Did not picture that that's how it's going to go. I agree with that. I think Carrie Bates was just like, I want to kill a Legionnaire. And I think this will be exciting because, again, it's the 70s. Things are getting a little bit, darker, still not that, but they're starting to push boundaries a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, next one. And we're just continuing with Invisible Kid. This is from Todd Ramsey. He says, I'm a fan of Lyle. I think I might have first read about him in a Silver Age reprint until the Wildfire Jacques story. When SW6 was introduced, I really liked him. He was overall great in the reboot, and Levitz did okay in the otherwise terrible Secret Origin mini, adding martial arts into his skills. Reboot Lyle was not my favorite, and Bendis couldn't decide if Lyle or Jacques was a member or if they both were. Yeah, that's a Bendis thing. Power-wise, he seemed to get small tweaks where he could make objects he was holding invisible and be undetected by various forms of advanced technology. Going forward, a nice power upgrade would be able to expand a bit more in making objects invisible, even just to see through them. And I think that's probably the toughest part about Invisible Kid is I think his power set was great in the 1960s. And I think it's really struggles in 2026 unless you make him like invisible to everything. So for example, like if he could walk into a room and his heat signature isn't showing or radar is not picking him up or whatever. And then I think the other problem that you have with Invisible Kid is you have Invisible Woman, and Marvel's just done her power set so much better.
Yeah. Yep.
And so there's that comparison where you sit there and you go like, okay, well, can he make bubbles? Can he do this? Can he do this? Can he do this? And I'll just do an aside on the Fantastic Four series that's going on right now. He literally just came up one where he turned Invisible Woman into the greatest villain in the Marvel universe from an alternate universe. And she's just using her powers the way, like, if you expanded her power set to a logical extreme, she's killing everybody.
Oh my God.
And it's an amazing story. It's an alternate universe. And she comes to the Marvel universe. I guess it's the 616, takes out Galactus, and she's just ready to destroy everybody. And I think that's part of the problem with Invisible Kid is she's so good and she's become so iconic, and he's just kind of second or third. So even if they give him like karate skills or everyone goes, well, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that?
Yeah, I mean, they played around with it in the reboot where he was able to make other people invisible occasionally. But they had to be, like right with him and stuff like that. And it took effort. And that feels like it's something that they could have expanded upon, but yeah, it is what it is.
But what's funny though, is you have Phantom Girl, who's essentially Kitty Pryde, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Kitty Pryde is essentially Phantom Girl. Let's give credit where it should be.
It's true.
And they've just said, like, let's just make this power set work for both. And I think probably both reads the other. Like, if you're writing this and you just go, okay, these are the powers. She gets better so she can grab people and drag them through. She's, she can turn part of her body phantom, but not the whole thing. And if that's just the standard, you go, cool, and we're just going to keep them the same. I kind of wonder if the Volume 3 run with Jacques, I wonder if they would have started matching his power sets to be the same as Sue Storm. Because that was really when she was taking off, like mid-'80s, and then they were starting to really expand her power set.
Yeah, you have to do something if we're talking about Lyle or even Jacques, honestly, to have him on the team. If you're going to have an Invisible Kid, you need to either have him be a super spy, and that's like what he does with a lot of invisibility gadgets, more than just, a Harry Potter cloak, because even when Harry was walking around with his cloak on, if he bumped into something, that would give him away. So he needs to have a seriously upgraded invisible skill set, because he kind of overlaps with Shrinking Violet and with Phantom Girl at that point, because you have this undetectable capability, but then while he's invisible, he could theoretically be seen through other measures. So having him be completely invisible to IR and other spectrums and things like that would be an interesting way to take that character, I think.
Or it would be really interesting if they just had him be, and I'm going to say invisible in quotes, so you could see him, but nothing technological could see him. And that was just his standard. So like, it could be something that just drives Brainiac 5 crazy, because he's like, yeah, HQ is saying we've got 10 members, but I know there's 11 in the building because you don't show up on this. And I have to reprogram, and he's just getting angrier and angrier. And then like, you could have some fun with that of just having, and again, I think you could also show, like, to be honest, you can show the isolation. Like, he's not really part of the group. Just imagine if you said, like, no robot can see him. So he goes out to like the 31st century version of Uber and he's like, hey, I'm here for my ride. And the robot just keeps driving by. And he's like, he can't go to a machine and get anything to turn on.
One star.
Yeah. Like you could do a lot with this. And that's what I think they need to do. And just think outside the box with these powers. Yeah. What kind of fun can they have?
Yeah, I mean, because there's two things that I think about, right? Is that fact that, spies or even people that aren't necessarily spies, but people that have access to information that, could be potentially sensitive, you typically all sign documentation or go through lie detector tests to say, I'm never going to talk about this ever in my life. And to our point about holding secrets, that can be a big deal depending on the level of the secrets. If you're like tamped down about having to talk about certain things and eating you away, that can be a really interesting dramatic storyline source. And the other thing I really liked, and this is kind of what Ross was talking about when we did this episode, was to have a Legion advanced team for anything that they do, right? This would be Vi, Invisible Kid, Phantom Girl, and others that would be the spies to be able to covertly collect information about what it is that they needed to do and then feed it back to the team and then to propel the story forward. I thought that was a fantastic idea.
Yeah. So you got to have excess on that team. Sorry, she's got to be there. I'm just going to put that.
Absolutely. I'm not going to complain about that.
That's going to be part of that. Okay. Continuing on, we're still talking about the death of Lyle. And so Barry, and I hope I'm going to pronounce your last name right. I'm going to say Liga. Barry Liga sent in a couple of emails. One that he sent in, and he's talking about like when Invisible Kid comes back during Levitz's run. And he says, hey guys, in the latest episode, there's some speculation on why Paul brought Lyle back, or at least fainted in that direction. he actually didn't. In some interview somewhere, which of course I can't find right now, and I know that feeling because I reference interviews that I've listened to, and I'm
I've
like,
heard
where
it.
did I?
No, I've seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know the feeling. Keith said that he threw Lyle into the story just to mess with Paul as revenge for, quote, the population of the planet Daxam rises into the air, unquote. Basically, it was a slam serve back to Levitz's side of the court, quote, see what you can do with this, unquote. And Paul ran with it. Now, this is one of those things where like when we talk about like the best creative teams, and I always hear those stories about like, the writer does this and the artist does something and they've got to work back and forth and they kind of challenge the other person to go in a different direction or they challenge the person to have fun. So does this surprise me in the slightest? No. Like I would not be shocked if Keith's like, I'm just going to draw Invisible Kid and let's see what Paul does with this. Because I think some of the best creative teams do that. Like let's push the guy in a different direction. And because it does kind of come out of nowhere and it does force Paul to probably change where he was going with it and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
And the one thing that anytime you hear an interview with J.M. DeMatteis and he talks about that was his working style with Keith, where Keith would throw an idea to him but it would also say, do whatever you want, like however you want to dialogue this. And if you go in a different direction, cool, we'll work off of it. That having that confidence to just say to your partner, like, no, take it where you want. We'll make it make sense. That's when you know the creative team is humming the best it can.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, you think about it, and for most of us, I would say in our lives, we work on a very regimented, structured way of doing things. But creatives are very, typically very different because they have these vivid imaginations and they have to get these things out on paper. And to be able to have that back and forth to say, here's my idea, do something with this. And then that goes backwards and back and forth, iterating every time it goes back and forth in a good way is kind of magic. You know what I mean? So it's when that works, it's just so amazing.
I agree. And speaking of creative, I'm just going to call this out since he did send the email. Barry Laga is actually an author and has written a bunch of books. And from a superhero Legion thing, he actually wrote 6 Flash books. And I think they're Flash jumping through time. And one of them is actually called The Flash, The Tornado Twins. And he does pull the Legion into that. Highly recommend these. And I got to say, this is a cool thing. This is now, I think, the second published author that we've connected with on this podcast. So it's always great to talk to creative people or get messages from creative people who can give us sort of that different
yeah, that's right. Because actually, as we record this, Alex Segura has already released his Daredevil book. So go ahead and pick that one up too, because that's a fun read.
Definitely. I have one more email about the death of Invisible Kid. This is from Martin Gray, who we are going to see on a very soon future podcast. Martin writes, I remember getting Superboy 203 as a kid and being most displeased. The ending felt flat. Oh, great, he's dead. As if Lyle would never find a girlfriend in the real world. That's a good point. It reminds me of the horrible Avengers 200 business when Ms. Marvel went off to live in limbo with her, can I say this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
With her rapist, Immortus. Yeah, that's on the list of like worst comic stories ever. And then he goes, what a shame Chris Claremont wasn't called in to bring justice for Invisible Kid. Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with this. Like there is a part of this story that just makes Invisible Kid look really horrible. And then the big thing that I wanted to quote, and I highlighted this on the email. Did Mila not feel sus to anybody else? Yes, it was later implied she was a demon, but I always thought it was her, not Tharok, who was really bringing Validus to Legion HQ. We know from Silver Age Superman that phantoms can control weak-minded souls. Mila wanted dead Lyle as her companion. But did her plan even work? We never saw Lyle with her at the end. Hopefully he immediately went to heaven, rather than whatever hellscape she was stinking up. And yeah, like, I mean, again, they could have really gone dark with this if they wanted to. Yeah. And that's about as dark as I can think of. I mean, I think we talked about it in the podcast. Like the whole Validus thing was, I don't want to say unimportant, but like why he was going to the HQ really didn't matter. He just had to get there and kill somebody. So that wasn't really thought out. And I think if it had been Mila, like if when they came back and in like Tales of Legion, what was it, 313, like if it had been revealed, like, yeah, I'm Mila and I'm the reason why he's dead and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that would have been a gut punch, I think.
Yeah.
I think it would have been nice at some point to actually, like, I guess that's a good question. Why didn't they give Invisible Kid a happy ending? Like they didn't show
Right.
the two of them. Like, and I know we didn't bring that up because we had there's so much with the story to talk about. But yeah, like why didn't they at least show the two of them, like
Yeah.
arm
It's
in
like,
arm or whatever?
right. Like the ending in Return of the Jedi, right? When you see the Force ghosts of Anakin just kind of popping up there and saying, "Hey, I made it.
Yeah.
I'm in the good place now." You get Mila again saying, "Hey, here's what I was doing," but you never see Lyle, and I'm like, that kind of sucks.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we can't take the like, we'll go with the he's in the good place, but
well, the good place is actually the bad place if you watch the good place.
Except that by the time the 31st century rolls around, the good place is the good place again, and then they're fine. So spoilers for a show that's old. So I will go with that. Then I thought, he continues, then I thought the pencil business was the most incredible, intelligent, logical thing in the world. Of course, as a kid. Now I don't. I mean, are we to believe his powers of invisibility come down to squinting? Yeah, that's a good point. But it looked cool when they did it.
I was thinking about this. You know what I thought about? And I wish I thought about it when we were talking with Eric and Peter, but it was the analogy of how the One Ring worked in the world of Tolkien. When Bilbo's wearing the ring, he doesn't say anything crazy, but of course Sauron has not really gained any power. He's still kind of in hiding in his alias. But when Frodo puts on the ring, he sees a very different world. I think they did it pretty well in the movies, but you get a different view of reality. And in Lyle's case, he's getting it by kind of focusing. So, and that's, the moment of focusing between Lyle and the pen, right? So it's a matter of focus to get into one world through the other. And that I can buy. And the way that I was thinking of it too, it was just, okay, you just put the ring on and you're in this weird, kind of quasi-demonic world, right? Where you see these ring wraiths as these horrible kings that are going to come after you to kill you. So that's kind of how I viewed this when I was thinking about what Martin was saying.
Yeah. I think just in the 5 minutes we've discussed this, that's more than they thought about this in 1970, whatever. I mean, this is the one thing that I keep coming back to when I want to start getting down a rabbit hole or I want to judge is I just think Cary Bates is what, 20, 22, 23 when he's writing like this.
That. Yeah.
Well, and he's got an editor who, from all stories, was not a pleasant human being to work with, who's constantly giving him crap and basically saying, like, I can get 10 better writers in here tomorrow. And he's just trying to keep working and he's trying to work on comics that he loves. And he's pumping out, I don't know how many, like he's doing Superman and he's doing this and he's doing at least one or two other things as well. Like there's no rest. So yeah, I mean, so it doesn't make sense. Like it wasn't an era where they were allowed to, like, it wasn't like Marvel. Like Marvel was allowed, the creators were allowed to like build and breathe and kind of have some fun with this. And they were not. Last couple of points Martin makes that I don't want to miss this because I think two of them are really key. Now, to answer the question, and we talked about, was this a Superboy comic or was this a Legion comic? And he said, I'd been there for the transition from regular Superboy comic to Legion book, and it really felt the Legion were in charge. And he goes, I was pathetically grateful whenever we got a page or two of Smallville shenanigans. So basically, the thing that I hate the most when they do, he loved that when it was coming out. And I think that's probably a really true statement, is that whether DC thought it was a Legion comic or not, I think it was obvious to the readers that it was.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and that was in response to Peter's question being, is it, the Legion or Superboy and the Legion or Superboy and the Legion?
Yeah, and remember as well, like, this was kind of to rectify a huge mistake that the Legion had done, like when they had taken Adventure away from the Legion, because Adventure was one of their best-selling books. And if I remember correctly, the only reason why they stopped having the Legion in Adventure, and please, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know we'll get more emails telling me that I'm wrong, is that, okay, what was this? Mort Weisinger didn't want to edit, or no, got a different book, so he could only edit, let's just say 4 books a month, and that number's probably wrong, and he didn't want to edit Adventure anymore, and DC said, well, nobody else can edit the Legion, so we're gonna, like, it was something silly like that. Like, it wasn't for sales, and it wasn't for, because the Legion wasn't working, it was solely because of an editorial shakeup. That's what I remember reading.
Similar to what you're saying there, that Weisinger was thinking that Superboy and Supergirl were drowning out the Legion itself. So that's my recall, but I could be completely wrong about that too.
Okay. And I think, and I have made this comment before, like DC was really driven by, you put that big red S on the cover of a comic book, it's going to sell. And historically that had always been true. Like, It's very funny now. And I keep going back to this, like, the only time Batman comics sold from like the 1950s to the 1980s was when the Batman TV show was on. Like you look at those numbers and Superman is dwarfing Batman in sales numbers. And it was kind of a true thing. You put that big S on the cover, people buy the comic. So it does make sense on that. But I mean, the Adventure was like the second or third best-selling DC book. And they kind of said, we don't want the Legion anymore. So, and that's why it's always when somebody says, like, what was the golden age of the Legion? And it's realistically the Silver Age. That's when they sold the most issues. That's when they were the most popular. I have friends who didn't read comics after like 1975 and they see a Legion and they're like, oh, I know who that is. Because it was everywhere. They saw these and they're like, oh, I recognize that. Like from their childhood, they're like, oh, I know this because they were everywhere. Okay. Sorry. More asides. We're going to close the mailbag there. And again, thanks so much for all the emails. They are awesome. We love reading them. We wanted to make sure we gave you the proper due on this podcast. So what do we need from, what else is coming on Discord or what else from Blue Sky? Or are we good?
I think we're good on the Discord side.
Perfect.
I mean, just check, see if there's anything interesting in Blue Sky. I don't think so. Spell Blue Sky properly.
Well, I'm tempted to say we're at almost an hour. I think we can.
Yeah.
We can.
Exactly. No, I don't. No, I think we're good. I think we're up.
Okay.
All right. So that finishes up the mailbag. So again, thanks for writing in. We'll, I guess, close the mailbag as the operator.
We're closing the mailbag.
Yeah. So until then, we will see you guys next time.
Yes. Long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV.
CertainPOV.com.